Hello everybody! Today I have a video documenting the process of me making an Itto sculpture for my girlfriend. It took a long time, so we're just gonna get right into it. So if you want to see the final thing, please stick around to the end to see what he looks like. Yay!
Okay, so I'm starting off with a little armature. I'm using, I think it's a 12 gauge, probably aluminum wire, and then some thin copper wire. I don't know the gauge of it, probably 22 gauge. I'm using the thin wire to help the clay stick to the thicker wire, so I'm wrapping it around to add a little bit of texture so the clay doesn't slide right off. This was useless because I ended up cutting those legs off later anyway, but that's besides the point. The foil is there to take up some mass, because if I use just clay, it would, one, use a lot of clay, and it would be really heavy. In retrospect, I'm wishing I made the beetle fully out of clay, but hindsight, whatever. I'm also making a small armature for Itto, just the head and the torso. If I did any planning for this before, he probably would have gotten legs, and I wish I did planning, because they were mad problems later on. Hindsight again, you know what they say. Ha ha ha. I'm just wrapping this again with the copper wire just so the clay has something to stick to. Once I'm done with the armature, I'm going to go in with a first pass of clay. I'm using Super Sculpey Original, not firm. This first pass isn't going to have any details. It's simply so that there's no foil sticking out, and so the other clay can stick to that, because the clay is going to stick to clay better than it is to foil. It's going to be ugly, but I did sculpt the underbelly or the underside of the beetle nicely, because why would I make it harder for myself when I could just do it at this stage, right? Once I sculpt the underbelly, I give it its first bake. Stab the top of it with a bunch of holes so this pass that I'm doing right now can stick to it better. I start sculpting the horn, and then I'm going to start sculpting the little helmet. I don't know what it is, the head part. I'm not an entomologist, I don't know beetle parts. I'm going to call it his helmet. So I stick it on there, and I kind of want it to protrude a bit from the belly. So it looks like it's on top with like a hard delineation instead of like blending in. So it looks like they're two separate pieces. Since I baked it once already, the underbelly is hard. So I can use my knife and cut to get that hard edge without damaging the clay that's underneath, which is cool. Pro tip there. Once I get the helmet done, I'm going to do these exact same thing to make the carapace, or the part that's under the wings, because I'm going to put wings on top, but I want it to still have that hard belly. Now I'm going in with Itto. I put a little bit of clay around his first baked cranium because I wanted to build it up. It was a little small. And then before baking it again, I'm attaching his horns and his ears. I keep thinking he's a dog boy. He's not. He's an Oni. So I'm putting on his normal human Oni ears and his Oni horns for the Oni boy. Oh, booby time. Boobing him up, I guess. I already baked his head once. You can see it's a slightly different color. Now I'm adding on his little boobs and his abs. If there were any semblance of planning that I had did before, I could have made him a more dynamic pose, could have let loose a little bit. I didn't, so instead he's just standing there like a board. Whatever, it's fine. After fully baking the torso, I start getting to work on the leg, which were such a pain in my ass. Everything you see me doing on screen right now, I scrap completely and I start over so I can get the final version of the legs. But it was the same process. Once I got those legs done, I start sculpting his feet. Here I'm cutting the little blocks for the bottom of his geta, sandals, the little sandals, whatever. And here I'm carving in his yonic knee details. I'm not carving in or sculpting every single detail. I'm going to be painting a lot of them on because, like, here's my formal note to all Genshin character designers. There's enough on there. It's okay. You can stop. I'm putting his little hip cutout things. Those are the last of the details that I'm going to actually sculpt in 3D on the pants. The rest should be painted on. Now that the pants are done, I'm gonna try and connect his torso onto the body. His torso is already baked, so I'm just pressing it in there so I can get the right imprint of a connection. It's not enough to just have this pressed in like that to have a stable connection, so I go in with some actual glue afterwards. Now that it's glued and baked, I'm putting the belt on. The actual belt part wasn't difficult, just roll out a snake, flatten it, wrap it around the torso. The hard part was actually making his stupid little belt buckle. Not because it's a particularly difficult thing to sculpt, but because of the scale. You can see those little square blocks on my sculpting mat. Each one of those square blocks is 1 inch, so it's pretty freaking tiny. You can see how gargantuan my finger looks next to it. I believe that it's like a little Oni face on his belt buckle, whatever. I sculpt it. Since it's very fragile, after I sculpted it and attached it to the belt, I baked it again, even though all of that was already baked. I didn't want to risk smooshing it while I was sculpting the other details that were on his body.
I stopped sculpting while I stopped filming while sculpting because this guy was pissing me off. But I'm almost done now. You can see all the little details. The white stuff is epoxy, so it's like his head was like too forward. No, it was too far back. And then I broke his neck, and then I tilted his head forward, and then it was too far forward. So then I broke it again, and I tilted it back a little more. So now I think it's in the right spot. So I have to wait for all the epoxy. Focus on him. I have to wait for all the epoxy to cure around his neck. I just like the epoxy because it's stronger. If I mix them in the right ratio, unlike the last time I did it, I feel like it's stronger than the polymer clay. So I'm just using that to support his big old head. I also had to spend a lot of time getting the magnets right. His little coochie here. There was a magnet, but it was like in his cervix, so I had to get that out. And then the beetle, there was a magnet, and then it also got lost underneath the wings, so I put another one. You can see it peeking out. And now they actually stick together. It's not supposed to be like the strongest bond in the world. It's mostly just so he like stays on there and in the right spot. Because without it, he's just kind of like,
Woo! We're on the last spurt of sculpting, yay! So I'm taking my last little bit of clay, rolling it into some snakes to twist it together to make his little twisty rope bow thingy on his back. That thing, you know, yeah. Last is his hair. So I'm making a little core out of foil because if it was too heavy, he'd start tipping over backwards because the hair would be really heavy. Once I covered the foil up in clay, slap, 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 I put it onto his head, and I didn't show it, but to make all of the spikes and stuff on his hair, I just rolled out some little cones and then smoothed them out where they were necessary onto his head. Then once all that was done, I also did the bangs. And then that's it. He's finally done being sculpted. We're halfway there. Living on a prayer.
he's all done, at least with the sculpting part. So now I just have to do a bit of sanding. I already sanded down the beetle, so it's all ready to go, but I have to sand him now. It's not that much sanding, it's just I was fixing his butt and it looks like he took a big poopy in his diaper, and I have to sand that down to be smooth. I did a lot of sculpting off camera because frankly, I was getting quite pissed off and nobody needed to see that. Sanding time. I'm not gonna show you because it's just me rubbing his ass with paper.
Finally, it is painting time. For my base coat, I went in with some golden fluid acrylic. Could I have used real primer? Absolutely. Did I do that? Absolutely not. Moving on. I lost the clip of me painting him in that Genshin deep suntan color, so you see him. While he's drying off to the side, I went in with this pretty black gold color shift paint to paint on the base. And while the base was drying, I started mixing up this light purple and put a base coat on the beetle. Once the base coat of everything was dry, I started going in with local colors. I went in with a dark gray for the pants and going in with a little bit of red for the horns, his little hair vents. The little red Yonic knee patterns. And once those were done, I mixed a slightly darker gray than the pants so I could add those little stripies. Next up was all his markings or tattoos. I'm just going to call them tattoos. I went in with a little bit of pencil first to make sure I had them in the right place. He had them all over. I didn't know that. I realized after looking at his model. Once those were in place, I went in with a liner brush and some red paint to put them on there. Tatting this boy up. This part was actually really fun. I think it was the most fun painting part of it because it's just like everyone's little tattoo artist fantasy, but with zero of the risk and all of the fun. Now I'm coming in with the purple. He has this little crop top underneath his jacket thingy, and also I'm gonna call them his socks. I really should have looked up what the parts of his costume were, and I didn't, sorry. All the purple fabric had this yellow patterning on it. I went in with gold instead of yellow because the shiny paint. And then also the lining on his socks and his chest and his little necklace and the inner lining of his duster and his stupid belt buckle. Now I'm going in with black. Instead of plain black, I use the shiny sparkly black gold that's on his belt and his pant things and his shoes and his shin guards. I put a little bit of the red detailing on the shin guards and also his red bottom sandals, fancy boy. Then also his wrist guards and his bracelets. Also his earrings, and the most normal detail on this entire thing, for some reason I decided to also put in his toenails. We're almost there. I'm putting the little red detailing on the back of his duster. This was maybe the second worst part to paint just because all the stuff was in the way. I'm putting his little collar on, which is probably why I keep thinking he's a dog. His little boob straps, maybe the most important, as well as his thong. I'm just going to assume that's what it is. And lastly is the little bow thing. This was the worst part to paint. This sucked. Don't do this to yourself. This sucked.
So where I'm at right now with this, I basically finished his whole outfit. You can see that. Now I'm in a little bit of a predicament. I obviously still have to paint the hair, but I put this nose on, and when I sculpted it without the paint, it looked fine, and it looks okay from the side, and it looks okay from this side, but from the front, you can see that is just why is it's not in the right spot. So I'm in a little bit of a predicament. I'm thinking, do I knock it off and sand it off and just not have a nose there and leave it as the little smooth cheapy bump? Do we deal with it? I think I'm gonna sand it off. Even though this thing has been giving me hell, I'm like, what if I made it worse for myself? That sounds good. I think I'll do that. So before I do that, since I finished the whole outfit, I'm gonna do like a little precautionary coat of varnish. So I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna let it dry for like 2 hours after I put the varnish on. While it's drying, I can paint the beetle. Yeah, I'm finishing this today. Cause 1, my girl's birthday is tomorrow. And 2, I do not want to fucking do this anymore.
Starting off with a lovely isolation layer of varnish, I thought there would be a more satisfying shot. It was not. Before putting myself through another circle of hell, I decided, let me draw a face first, and if I really still hate it afterwards, then I can sand off the nose. And you know what? I ended up not hating the face. Thank gourd. So instead of sanding it off, I just finished drawing on both eyeballs, and I painted right from there. The face is like the most rewarding, but also the most nerve-wracking part, because it was far from the most difficult thing I painted here, but it's just like, it kind of makes or breaks the whole thing, you know? So I went in right with some white for his sclera and his teeth. Then I added some blushies and his tongue. Very important, the blushies. His eyes, I fully went in with yellow because I thought he had yellow eyes. Then I looked at a reference and realized that they are in fact orange. So I went in with orange, and then I put his red face markings on and added the red for some depth in his eyes as well. Starting with the face markings on this side, absolutely beefed it right here, but I fixed it off camera, I promise. Then I put a little bit more yellow in his eyes just for some highlight, even though they are orange. It's a nice highlight color, the yellow. We like it. Filling in the cavern of his mouth and using that crimson for a little more depth in his eyes. A little orange eyeshadow because I think it looks pretty. And I start going in with my black paint. This was the bane of my existence. You see how thin and shitty it is? Irate is not a strong enough word to convey how I was feeling at this paint situation. It was the only black paint I had. But we persevered. It just took 5 or 6 layers for everything that had to be black. It was fine. I wasn't mad about it, not even a little bit. Once we get everything on there, I start to realize, hey, you know what? These eyes, they're not very even, are they? I fixed it off camera. I was very mad about the paint, and I had to do like 10 more layers. Once that was done, I just put some little highlights in, and his face is complete. Now for the beetle, I'm just slapping a little bit of a white gradient on the horn and the pronged horn. Then I'm going in with some watered down dark purple on the abdomen. I know that beetle part now. And defining the like little creases and crevasses. I also put a little bit of a dark gradient on the toesies. And then I put a final dark purple coat on the tarsus. I looked that part up as well. And I painted it the same color as the abdomen. After I got all the gradients done, I just put in the final pattern on this little Oni Kabuto. I looked up the name, I know it. It was really hard to try and keep it even remotely symmetrical, but I just drew it on there with some thinned down white paint, and I stayed perfectly in frame the entire time. Once I got them sketched out, I just filled them in with solid white. It took like 1 or 2 layers. Once the white was all filled in, I went in with this really old pearlescent paint, and I went over the whole wing. You see me only going on the white here, but I ended up going over the whole wing just to add a nice little sheen. And then everything was all done, and I varnished it, and then I dropped it, and I broke the horn. It's fine. We glue, and we move on. We're almost there.
I know I look crazy. Before we cut to the final shots, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you made it this far, make sure you smash that like button and comment and subscribe. Is that what you say on YouTube? Anyway, to the final shots. So here he is, the final guy. I'm quite happy with how he turned out. And you know what? I think he would have looked better without the nose, but it's done. So yeah, that's the final guy. Like, in all honesty, I do not care about Genshin or care to know anything until Itto and Goro have explored each other's bodies.